light, temperature, food, and physical activity, these are evolutionarily pillars, and we have managed in our modern society to literally dismantle all four of those pillars with eating every day, artificial light, living in a temperature environment where we are air conditioned and heated all year round, and then also being, of course, sedentary. You can pick your poison, but all of these things have dramatic impingement on the circadian clock. My name is Gerhart-Hines, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. The overarching focus of my research is to look into how cues from the circadian clock interact with environmental cues such as temperature, and how all of these things impact adipose tissue. So circadian rhythm derives from the Latin term circa diem, which is about a day. And I think that is a beautiful beginning to this, because of course everything related to circadian biology has evolved from the 24-hour cycle of light and dark on Earth. Almost every single cell in our body is equipped with its own little clock. And this clock is a mix of, we call it a translational, transcriptional, autoregulatory feedback loop. And what that means is certain genes that are activating are increased at certain times of the day. These activators then feed forward and activate and increase the transcription of genes that are repressors. And these repressors feed back and inhibit the activators. What we know is that nearly every organism on Earth, across the three kingdoms, all have some form of rhythmic regulation. If we go back to some of the earliest clocks, billions of years ago, in single-cell organisms and bacteria, the very basis of survival, if you're a single-cell organism, is to prevent damage from your DNA and allow you to replicate and propagate. And so the reason that there was original rhythmicity instated was actually to make sure your replication, when you're most susceptible to DNA damage, occurred actually in the dark when the sun was not out, with its harmful UV rays to cause damage. And then essentially everything over the course of the next billion and hundreds of millions of years, as we get into now mammals, has sort of taken that, added more complex elements, because of course we're more complex, but essentially every organism that we've been able to find has some degree of rhythmicity. The clocks that exist in all of our cells, they are synchronized through signals emanating from the brain. And those signals happen in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. And that's a lot of words to basically say we have photoreceptors in our eyes. And every day when the sun rises, those photoreceptors sense the sun, and then the brain then sends these signals throughout the body, acting almost like a tuning fork to make sure all the cells and all the organs in our body are in sync. Now, that's the simplest way to explain synchronization, and that is the master clock we call the brain. However, where things get more interesting and physiologically nuanced is that there are several other major inputs into the clock throughout our body. Physical activity, which impacts the muscle and how that muscle clock interacts with the brain clock. What we eat often has been shown to impact the liver and how the liver clock functions. The temperature that we feel surrounding us, that impacts the clock, at least of our brown adipose. That's a lot of the work that I've helped pioneer. And lastly, the light itself. So seasonal changes and things of this nature are sensed by the clock. And so all of these four major inputs are what keep our bodies in tune and synchronized. And I think it's perhaps an important point that this is also why we probably have the sort of degree of pathology and disease that we do. What happens to us in terms of circadian rhythm when we eat, it really depends on when you're eating. I think the key here is that when you eat at normal times, or times that we've been evolutionarily programmed to eat, your body is able to respond in turn by using what it can, storing the rest. And I think that balance of use and storage is really what comes into play when you eat at times when we should not, late at night, and these kind of binge type feeding patterns. Several researchers over the last few years have begun noticing if you allow an animal to eat the equivalent of burgers and milkshakes nonstop, but for a period of time during the day. So in this case, when they're awake, they gain no more weight than an animal fed, say, a high fiber diet that was also allowed to eat as much as it wanted during that small window of time. And this is called time restricted feeding. comparing that to if an animal is allowed to eat, again, this sort of burger and milkshake diet over the course of a day as much as it wants over 24 hours, what they found was it ate about the same as the animal that only could eat during a certain time. But because it was spread out over 24 hours, the pathology, the increase in obesity, diabetes, various other gastrointestinal problems was completely clear. They've now extended this into humans, where a really fascinating study where people in the Southern California area just took a photo of food and sent it in. They were being made aware that they thought it was about the quantity, but actually what they found was there was only 1 hour of the day, when they surveyed tens of thousands of people, there was only 1 hour of the day where everyone was not eating. So 23 out of 24 hours a day, someone somewhere is eating. And when you relate this to the increase in metabolic disease, the correlation is undeniable. It's not to say that we have definitive evidence that it's only important about when you eat, but it certainly plays a huge role, I would say. I think circadian biology has changed our view of metabolism in the sense that it's done nothing short of revolutionize how we have to think about it. I think even down to cells in culture that scientists study, we now appreciate that there's a rhythmicity to everything. You know, when you do your study, whether it be a clinical trial or a mouse study or a Drosophila study, these animals have intrinsic rhythms that will influence your work. So from a technical standpoint, it's extremely important. And from a biological standpoint, we used to think that again, what you ate, it was more about the amount, eating high fat, exercising a lot. And we now are realizing, even now within this decade and in the future, when we do these things, will have as much impact and possibly even more than the quantity and the amount. And so I think in this way, everything from single cell research all the way up through clinical intervention studies have to take into account and understand the biology of natural circadian rhythm. There are actually several clinical studies going on right now to determine not only when we should eat, but if there is an interaction, because there almost certainly is, with the composition of the diet. Over the next couple of years, there'll be some really exciting work coming out about being able to then make actual recommendations rather than just sort of scientific exploration, because of course we always like to see it translate into demonstrable action in the clinic of how we can help people in terms of health. I will say in general, being a circadian researcher has changed the way that I try not to eat after, say, 7 or 8 p.m. I don't drink coffee afternoon. I exercise mostly in the morning, when research so far seems to indicate that that's sort of evolutionarily where the most optimal time to work out or be physically active. I realize, as boring as they are, those are sort of the original pillars of our evolutionary control, and that is what unequivocally in the clinic shows the best indicators of health. Could also happen to be that it overlapped with becoming a parent, and so it puts you on a bigger schedule than I was as a grad student. But being a circadian researcher has unequivocally shaped the way that I live my life, that's for sure.